The hallway of the small apartment building was quiet in the late afternoon, the kind of quiet that made every footstep echo. Officer Ramirez paused outside the door marked 3B, adjusting the strap on his radio. Beside him sat Coda, his young police pup, tail curled neatly around his paws, ears flicking at distant sounds. It was supposed to be a routine welfare check. Neighbors had called about loud crying earlier in the day, then nothing at all. Ramirez lifted his hand to knock. Before his knuckles touched the wood, Coda stood up. The dog moved forward and planted himself directly in front of the door, broad chest blocking the handle. His tail was low now. A soft whine slipped from his throat, not loud, just enough to be heard in the narrow hall. "Coda," Ramirez whispered, surprised. "Easy, boy." Coda didn't move. Instead, he leaned into the door, nose pressed to the crack beneath it, breathing fast. His ears tilted forward, then back. Another whine. This time it trembled. Ramirez felt a tightening in his chest. The building smelled faintly of dust and old paint, but beneath it, something sharper lingered, something he couldn't quite name. He bent slightly, searching Coda's eyes. The pup's gaze was fixed on the door, focused in a way that made the world feel suddenly smaller. Inside there was a faint shuffle, a child's breath barely audible. "Coda," Ramirez murmured again, heart beating faster now. "What is it?" The dog pressed harder against the door and let out a low, pleading sound, as if he were standing between danger and someone who couldn't protect themselves. Moments later, everything changed. Before we continue, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching dog stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? The hallway smelled faintly of old paint and laundry soap. Late afternoon light slanted through the narrow window at the end of the corridor, turning dust into floating gold. Officer Mateo Ramirez stood still for a moment, listening. Somewhere above him, a television murmured. A radiator clicked. Nothing else moved. Beside him sat Coda. The young police pup rested neatly on his haunches, tail wrapped around his paws like he had practiced 100 times. His ears flicked at every distant sound. Not alert, not alarmed, just aware. Ramirez adjusted the strap on his radio and glanced at the door in front of them. Apartment 3B. The call had been simple. A neighbor reported crying earlier in the day. A child, maybe. Then silence. No follow-up. No shouting. No noise after that. It was the kind of call officers handled every day. Quiet. Routine. Ramirez shifted his weight and looked down at Coda. "All right, partner," he murmured. "Let's make this quick." Coda blinked up at him. His tail tapped the floor once. They walked the last few steps together. The hallway creaked beneath Ramirez's boots. Coda's paws made almost no sound. At the door, Ramirez paused again. He lifted his hand. Before his knuckles touched the wood, Coda stood. Not fast. Not sudden. Just deliberate. He stepped forward and placed his body squarely in front of the door, blocking the handle. Ramirez froze. "Coda," he whispered. The pup didn't look at him. His nose lowered to the thin crack beneath the door. His ears tilted forward, then back. A soft sound slipped from his throat. A whine. Low. Uneasy. Ramirez felt something tighten in his chest. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. "Coda, easy," he said quietly. "Sit." The dog didn't move. Instead, he leaned closer to the door, pressing his shoulder against it as if holding it in place. Another whine. This one trembled. Ramirez crouched slightly, studying him. Coda's tail was no longer curled. It hung low. Not tucked. Just uncertain. His breathing had changed too. Shorter. Faster. "What do you smell, huh?" Ramirez murmured. Coda didn't answer. He shifted his paws and angled his body sideways, still blocking the handle, protecting it. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Ramirez straightened slowly and placed his hand lightly on the dog's back. Warm fur. Steady heartbeat. But underneath it, tension. Not fear. Something else. The scent in the air reached him then. Faint. Metallic. Mixed with something sour and old. Not blood. Not smoke. Just wrong. He swallowed. Coda, he said gently. I need you to move. The pup turned his head slightly, just enough for Ramirez to see his eyes. Dark. Focused. Not playful. Not confused. They flicked once toward the door. Then back to Ramirez. As if to say, wait. Ramirez hesitated. Training told him to knock. Instinct told him to listen to the dog. He lifted his hand again. This time he knocked softly. Police, he called. Anyone home? Silence. Coda pressed harder against the door. His nails scraped faintly on the floor. Another whine. Longer. Pleading. Ramirez's heart thudded in his ears. Coda, he breathed. From inside the apartment something moved. A small sound. Not footsteps. More like a shuffle. Then breathing. Thin. Shaky. Ramirez leaned closer. Hello, he said. It's okay. You're not in trouble. The door handle twitched. Coda stiffened. Every muscle in his body drew tight. His ears lifted. His tail went still. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood there. A wall of fur and instinct. The handle turned halfway. Stopped. A voice whispered from inside. Barely louder than air. Please. Ramirez's throat went dry. It's okay, he said gently. My name's Officer Ramirez. I'm here to check on you. The door cracked open. Just an inch. Light spilled into the dark space beyond. And a small face appeared. A child. Maybe 8. Maybe 9. Hair tangled. Eyes wide. Hands clutching the edge of the door. Coda didn't move. He shifted just enough to put himself between the child and the hallway. Not blocking. Shielding. The child's gaze dropped to him. One small hand reached out and touched his ear. Coda stayed still. Completely still. Like a statue carved out of breath and fur. Ramirez felt something break open in his chest. Hi, he said softly. Are you alone in there? The child swallowed. No. Is someone hurt? The child hesitated. Then nodded. Coda leaned slightly toward the door. A quiet huff escaped his nose. Not fear. Not warning. Concern. Ramirez stepped closer. Coda, stay. The dog didn't look away from the child. The door opened a little wider. Inside, the apartment was dim. Curtains drawn. Air stale. A couch against the wall. A blanket on the floor. And beyond that, a shape that didn't move. The child's voice shook. He told me not to open the door. Ramirez crouched to the child's level. You did the right thing, he said. The child's fingers tightened in Coda's fur. But Coda wouldn't move. The dog exhaled slowly, as if he had been waiting for permission. Ramirez reached for his radio. Coda, he whispered. Good boy. The pup didn't wag. Didn't bark. He just stayed there. Holding the doorway. Holding the moment. Holding something fragile together. And in that quiet hallway, with dust floating in the light and a child's breath trembling in the air, Ramirez knew this wasn't a routine call anymore. Not even close. Because whatever Coda had sensed behind that door was far from ordinary. Ramirez stayed crouched in the doorway. The child stood half hidden behind Coda, one small hand still resting on the dog's ear. The apartment beyond them felt heavier than the hallway. The air barely moved. Can you tell me your name? Ramirez asked softly. The child hesitated. Lena. Her voice was thin, like she hadn't used it much today. That's a nice name, he said. My name is Mateo. And this is Coda. Coda flicked one ear at his name. Didn't turn. Didn't step away. Lena's eyes followed every tiny movement of the dog's body. He won't leave, she whispered. Ramirez nodded. He's very good at his job. He glanced into the apartment again. The living room was small. A couch pushed against the wall. A low table with cups that had gone cold. The television was off, but the screen still glowed faintly with its own reflection. And on the floor near the kitchen doorway, a man lay on his side. Not moving. Ramirez's stomach tightened. Lena, he said carefully. Is that your dad? She nodded once. Is he sleeping? She shook her head. The word came out slow. He fell. Coda shifted his weight. Not forward. Not back. Just bracing. His tail stayed low. His ears angled toward the man on the floor. Ramirez reached for his radio. But before he spoke into it, Coda made another sound. A short whine. Higher than before. Not fear. Not pain. More like a question. Ramirez placed a hand lightly on Coda's back. I see it too, he whispered. He stepped just inside the doorway. The apartment smelled faintly of sweat and something bitter. Like old coffee. The man's chest rose. Then fell. Slow. Uneven. Ramirez knelt beside him. Sir, he said. Can you hear me? No answer. He checked the man's wrist. A pulse. Weak. But there. Lena, he said gently. I need you to stand right there with Coda for me. Okay. She nodded quickly. Coda didn't move. Not even when Ramirez stood and stepped farther inside. The pup's body angled toward Lena now. A quiet living wall. Ramirez pressed his radio. Dispatch, I have a male adult unresponsive. Requesting medical. Static crackled. Copy. Ramirez looked back at Lena. Did he say anything before he fell? She thought. He said his head hurt. Ramirez nodded. And you called for help? I tried. Her voice dropped. The phone was too high. Ramirez felt a pull in his chest. Did you try to open the door? She nodded again. He said no. Silence hung between them. Coda's breathing slowed. Not relaxed. Controlled. His ears stayed forward, tracking every sound in the apartment. A car passed outside. Somewhere upstairs a door closed. Life going on. Unaware. Ramirez moved to the kitchen. The sink was full of dishes. The counter held a half-empty bottle of water. And an open bottle of pills. He didn't touch them. Just looked. Noted. He returned to the living room and crouched again near the man. Sir, he said a little louder. My name is Officer Ramirez. Can you hear me? A groan. The man's eyelids fluttered. His mouth moved. No sound came out. That's good, Ramirez said. Stay still for me. He glanced back at Lena. She was watching everything. Wide-eyed. Silent. Coda's tail tapped the floor once. Soft. Then went still again. The dog shifted his stance slightly closer to Lena, blocking her view of the man on the floor. Ramirez noticed. A small choice, but an intentional one. Coda, he said quietly. You're doing great. The pup didn't look at him, but his breathing deepened, as if he had heard. Footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. Voices. EMS is here, dispatch crackled. Ramirez exhaled slowly. Okay, he said to Lena. Some helpers are coming. Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to Coda. Will they be mad? No, Ramirez said. They're here to help your dad. The knock came. Firm. Gentle. Ramirez opened the door wider. Two paramedics stepped in carrying bags. They paused when they saw Coda and the child. Hey there, one of them said softly. You must be Lena. She nodded. The other paramedic knelt beside the man. Sir, can you squeeze my hand? The man's fingers twitched. Barely. They worked quietly. Checking. Listening. Murmuring medical words that sounded calm but urgent. Coda watched. Not anxious. Not playful. Just alert. Every time one of them moved too close to Lena, his body shifted slightly. Not blocking. Guiding. Ramirez stayed near her. You did the right thing, he said again. Her voice came out small. He told me to stay quiet. Ramirez nodded. But you weren't quiet, he said gently. You were brave. Her fingers tightened in Coda's fur. He wouldn't let me open the door. Ramirez glanced down at the dog. Coda finally turned his head and looked at him. Just once. As if to answer. The paramedic looked up. We need to take him in. Ramirez nodded. Okay. They lifted the man carefully. The stretcher wheels clicked softly on the floor. Lena flinched at the sound. Coda leaned closer to her. Not touching. Just close enough to feel. Can I go? She asked. Yes, Ramirez said. You can ride with them. She hesitated, then looked at Coda. Will he come? Ramirez smiled faintly. He has to stay and work. But I'll be right behind you. Coda gave a quiet huff. Lena leaned down and pressed her forehead against his. Thank you, she whispered. The dog didn't move. Didn't lick. Didn't wag. He simply stayed. Holding still. Holding space. The paramedics guided Lena toward the door. She took one step. Then another. And then she stopped. Coda's ears lifted again. A soft whine escaped him. Not fear. Not warning. Something unfinished. Ramirez watched him. Coda, he said. The dog stepped forward. Just one pace. Toward the apartment. Toward the space where the man had fallen. He sniffed the air. Then turned back to Lena. And sat. Right in front of her. Blocking the doorway now. Not letting her leave. Ramirez frowned slightly. Coda, come. The dog didn't respond. He whined again. Lena looked up. What is it? Ramirez's heart thudded. He glanced back into the apartment. The living room was empty now. But the kitchen light was still on. The pill bottle still open. Something felt unfinished. Coda, he said again. Move. The dog stayed. Eyes steady. Ears forward. Body firm. Not refusing. Warning. Ramirez felt the tension return. Slow. Heavy. Like before. He took a step back inside. And that was when he noticed. The faint sound. From the bedroom. Not a voice. Not a cry. Just movement. Like fabric brushing the floor. Ramirez's hand went to his radio. Coda's tail went still. The moment stretched. And the first warning became something else entirely. Because Coda wasn't just blocking a door anymore. He was trying to say, there's more. Ramirez stood still in the living room. The paramedics waited in the hallway with Lena, their voices low and careful. The apartment felt different now. Lighter without the man on the floor. And heavier with what remained. Coda stayed seated in front of the doorway. Blocking it. Not with force. With intention. Buddy, Ramirez said quietly. We're done here. Coda didn't move. His ears angled toward the bedroom. His head tilted slightly. Listening. The faint sound came again. A soft rustle. Then nothing. Ramirez took one slow step toward the bedroom door. Coda, heel. The dog rose. Relief flickered in Ramirez's chest. But instead of coming to him, Coda walked toward the bedroom. 2 steps. Stopped. Looked back. Waiting. Ramirez exhaled. All right, he murmured. I hear you. He moved forward. The bedroom door was half closed. Light spilled out from a small lamp inside, painting the hallway wall in pale yellow. He knocked gently. Police, he called. Is anyone in there? Silence. Coda stood beside him now. Not touching. Not leaning. Just close. The rustling sound came again. Closer this time. Ramirez pushed the door open. The room was small. A bed against the wall. Clothes folded in careful stacks. A window with thin curtains stirring slightly in the afternoon breeze. And near the far corner, a closet door. Closed. Coda's ears lifted. His tail lowered. A single short whine slipped from his throat. Ramirez felt the hair rise on his arms. Hello, he said. Nothing. Coda stepped forward. Slowly. Carefully. Not barking. Not growling. Just moving. Ramirez reached out and touched his harness. Easy. The closet door shifted. Just a little. A shadow moved behind it. Ramirez's voice stayed calm. I'm not here to hurt anyone. The door opened a crack. A woman stood inside. Barefoot. Hair tangled. Eyes wide and unfocused. She clutched a blanket around her shoulders like armor. I didn't do anything, she whispered. Coda stopped. Saturday. His posture softened. Ears relaxed just a fraction. Ramirez lowered his voice. Ma'am, are you okay? She shook her head. No. Her knees buckled. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor. Coda stepped closer. Not touching. Just within reach. The woman's breathing was fast. Uneven. Ramirez knelt a few feet away. Did you need help? She nodded. He fell, she said. I told her not to open the door. Ramirez swallowed. You're Lena's mother? The woman pressed her face into her hands. I didn't know what to do. Coda leaned slightly toward her. His nose lifted. He sniffed the air. Then turned his head toward the doorway. Toward where Lena waited. A soft huff escaped him. Ramirez understood. She's safe, he said. She's with paramedics. The woman's shoulders sagged. I was scared. Ramirez nodded. I know. For a moment the room held only breathing. The slow stir of curtains. The hum of traffic outside. Coda sat between Ramirez and the woman. A quiet bridge. Ramirez pressed his radio. Dispatch, I have another adult inside. Conscious but distressed. Static answered. Copy. He looked at the woman again. Do you need medical help? She shook her head. No. Do you feel safe here? Her eyes flicked to the door. Then to Coda. She nodded slowly. Yes. Coda's tail tapped once. Soft. Like a heartbeat. Ramirez stood. Okay. We're going to get you and your daughter to the hospital. The woman nodded again. She tried to stand. Her legs wobbled. Coda moved closer. Just enough for her to rest a hand on his back. She didn't pet him. She leaned. Borrowed his balance. Thank you, she whispered. Coda didn't respond. He simply held still. They walked back into the living room together. The hallway outside was brighter now. Lena stood with the paramedics. Her eyes widened when she saw her mother. Mom! She ran forward, wrapped her arms around her. The woman sank to her knees and hugged her back. Tight. Quiet. Coda stayed a step away. Watching. Ramirez felt the tension ease. Not disappear. Just soften. The paramedics guided them toward the elevator. Ramirez followed. Coda at his side. The doors slid closed. The hallway went quiet again. Dust drifted in the light. Ramirez looked down at Coda. Good work, buddy. Coda finally wagged his tail. Once. Twice. Not excited. Relieved. They walked back into the apartment one last time. Just to check. The bedroom was still. The kitchen light buzzed faintly. The open pill bottle sat on the counter. Ramirez stared at it. Then at Coda. You didn't like that, he said softly. Coda's ears twitched. He stepped toward the counter. Sniffed. Then turned his head away. A low sound came from his chest. Not a growl. More like disapproval. Ramirez closed the bottle and set it upright. Yeah, he murmured. Me neither. He stepped into the hallway. Pulled the door shut. The latch clicked. The building returned to its normal sounds. TVs. Footsteps. A dog barking somewhere far away. Ramirez and Coda walked toward the stairs. Sometimes, Ramirez said quietly, people think you overreact. Coda glanced up at him. Ramirez smiled faintly. They think the first warning is enough. Coda's tail swayed. But you, Ramirez said, you don't stop at the first warning. Coda slowed. Then stopped. Ramirez paused. What is it? The dog turned. Looked back at apartment 3B. Just once. Then followed Ramirez down the stairs. The signal had been heard. But not without being tested. And if Ramirez had walked away when the door first opened, if he had ignored the hesitation, the rustle, the whine, the block at the doorway, the truth would have stayed hidden. The warning would have passed unheard. And a frightened family would have stayed locked inside their fear. But Coda hadn't stopped. And because of that, neither had he. Because the signals weren't meant to be dramatic. They were meant to be noticed. The hospital hallway smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic. Ramirez stood near the wall with Coda sitting at his side. watching as nurses moved past with clipboards and quiet urgency. The lights were soft here. Not harsh. Not bright. Just steady. Lena sat on one of the blue chairs across from him, her legs swinging slightly above the floor. Her mother sat beside her, wrapped in a thin gray blanket, holding a paper cup with both hands. Steam curled into the air. Coda's ears twitched at every sound. Footsteps. Wheels. Voices behind closed doors. But his body stayed loose now. No blocking. No bracing. Just waiting. Ramirez folded his arms and leaned back against the wall. "You doing okay?" he asked Lena. She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. "I don't like hospitals," she said. He smiled faintly. "Most people don't." She looked at Coda. He knew. Ramirez tilted his head. "Knew what?" "That something was wrong," she said. "Before I did." Coda lifted his head slightly at the sound of her voice. Not toward her. Toward the memory of the door. The doctor came out a few minutes later. Middle-aged. Calm. Tired. "He's stable," she said. "Dehydration and a bad headache. He should be fine." The woman let out a breath she had been holding all day. Her shoulders sagged. Lena leaned into her side. Ramirez nodded. "That's good to hear." The doctor looked at Coda. "And you must be the hero," she added with a small smile. Coda blinked, turned his head away. As if the word didn't belong to him. They stayed a little longer, just to be sure. When they finally left, the evening air felt cooler. The sky had shifted from blue to a soft purple, clouds catching the last light. Ramirez walked them to the curb. The mother knelt in front of Coda. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice shook. Coda leaned back slightly. Not uncomfortable. Just humble. Lena hugged him this time. Tight. "You can come visit," she said. Ramirez smiled. "We'll see." They watched the taxi pull away. Then Ramirez and Coda walked back to the patrol car. The street smelled like rain. Somewhere a siren wailed. Far away. The shift wasn't over yet. But something had changed. The next morning Ramirez found himself thinking about that door. The way Coda had pressed against it. The way Lena's hand had rested on his ear. The way the sound had come from the bedroom. Not loud. Not urgent. Just there. They drove past the apartment building again later that week. Not for a call. Just passing through. Coda lifted his head. His ears flicked toward the familiar shape. Ramirez slowed slightly. "Recognize it?" Coda's tail swayed once. They didn't stop. But Ramirez felt the pull of it. Like a memory asking to be touched. 2 days later, the phone rang at the station. Not dispatch. The hospital. A social worker wanted to talk. Ramirez stood in the quiet office with the blinds half open, listening. "She told us what happened," the woman said. "She said she was scared. That she hid in the closet because she didn't want her daughter to see him collapse." Ramirez closed his eyes briefly. "And the dog?" "She said the dog made her open the door." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." The social worker continued. "She said when she heard him crying at the door she thought, if even the dog won't leave, maybe she shouldn't either." Ramirez looked at Coda, lying at his feet. He was asleep, paws tucked under his chest, breathing slow. "She thought she had more time," the woman said. "She didn't." After the call, Ramirez sat for a long moment without moving. The station hummed around him. Phones. Footsteps. Coffee brewing somewhere. Coda stirred. Lifted his head. "You hear that?" Ramirez asked. Coda blinked. Then stood. Walked to the door. Sat in front of it. Facing outward. Ramirez laughed quietly. "Yeah. Me too." They went back to the building the next afternoon. Not in uniform. Just Ramirez. Just Coda. The hallway looked the same. Same paint. Same light. Same quiet. Apartment 3B had new sounds now. A vacuum. Music playing softly. A child laughing. Ramirez knocked. Not as an officer. As a visitor. The door opened. Lena stood there. Her hair was brushed. her eyes brighter. "Coda," she said. The dog stepped forward, not rushing, not pulling, just walking into a familiar space. Her mother appeared behind her. She looked lighter. "We wanted to thank you," she said. Inside, the apartment felt different. Curtains open. Fresh air. The couch had been moved closer to the window. They sat for a while. Talked about school. About dogs. About how loud the vacuum was. Coda lay on the floor between them. Not watching the door this time. Just resting. Lena knelt beside him. "You don't have to guard it anymore," she whispered. Coda lifted his head. Licked her fingers once. Then laid his chin back down. Ramirez stood and looked at the door. Same door. Same handle. But now, it wasn't hiding fear. It wasn't holding secrets. It was just a door. And that was the difference. When they left, the hallway didn't feel tight anymore. It felt wide. Open. As if the building itself had exhaled. Ramirez paused before the stairs. "You know," he said to Coda, "sometimes the hardest part isn't opening the door." Coda looked up. "It's knowing when to." Coda's tail moved slowly. Once. Twice. They walked down together. Not because there was danger, but because there wasn't any more. And that was the real reveal. Not what was behind the door, but what came after it. Because when the door finally opened, it didn't just show fear. It showed the beginning of safety. The kitchen window was open just a few inches. Morning air slipped in, carrying the sound of traffic and distant voices from the street below. Lena sat at the small table with her homework spread in front of her, pencil moving slowly across the page. Her mother stood by the sink washing a single cup. They moved quietly around each other now. Not because they were afraid, but because they were still learning how to be calm again. Coda lay near the doorway, his chin resting on his paws. Ramirez stood beside him, hands in his jacket pockets, looking around the apartment. Everything felt different. The light was brighter. The air smelled like soap instead of dust. And yet, something heavy still lingered. Not in the room. In the memory. "Thank you for coming back," the mother said. Her voice was steadier than before, but still careful. Ramirez nodded. "Just wanted to check in." She dried her hands and sat across from Lena. Coda lifted his head slightly. Not alert. Just listening. "There's something I should explain," she said. Her eyes drifted toward the door. The same door. Lena looked up. "You already told them," she said softly. Her mother nodded. "But I didn't tell you everything." Ramirez stayed silent. He didn't take a seat. Didn't rush. The room needed space. "He's been sick for a while," the woman continued. "Headaches. Dizzy spells. He didn't want to go to the doctor." Lena's pencil stopped. "He said it was nothing." Her mother swallowed. "And I wanted to believe him." Coda shifted. His ears angled toward her voice. "When he fell," the woman said, "I thought maybe he'd just get up again." She looked down at her hands. "They always do in movies." No one spoke. The refrigerator hummed. A car door slammed outside. "I told Lena to stay in her room," she said. "I didn't want her to see him like that." Lena's eyes filled. "I heard him." Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "I know." Ramirez watched Coda. The dog's tail had gone still. His breathing slowed, as if he understood that this part wasn't about movement. It was about staying. "I hid," the woman said. "I thought if I waited it would pass." She looked at Coda. "But he wouldn't leave." Coda blinked once. "She said she tried to open the door," the woman went on. "And he stood in front of it." Ramirez nodded. "He was worried about her." The woman's lips trembled. "He made me listen," she whispered. Silence filled the kitchen. Not empty, just full of things no one had said before. "I heard him whining," she said. "Not barking. Not angry. Just asking." Lena looked at Coda. "He didn't scare me." Coda lifted his head and looked back at her. "He stayed," she said. "Even when I wanted to run." Ramirez exhaled slowly. That's what he's trained for, he said. To notice what we miss. The woman pressed her fingers to her eyes. I thought I had more time. Ramirez shook his head. You had enough. She looked up. If the neighbors hadn't called. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Coda stood and walked over to the table. Slow. Uncertain. He rested his head gently against the woman's knee. Not pushing. Just touching. She froze. Then placed her hand on his fur. Thank you, she whispered. His tail moved once. A small wave. After a while the room felt lighter. Like the truth had opened a window somewhere inside it. Ramirez checked his watch. I should go. Lena stood. So soon. He smiled faintly. We've got work. She looked at Coda. Will he remember us? Coda lifted his head. As if answering. Ramirez clipped on his leash. I think he already does. They walked toward the door. The same door. But now it opened without fear. Outside, the hallway echoed with ordinary sounds. A vacuum. Footsteps. Someone laughing down the stairs. Ramirez paused. You know, he said, turning back. What you did, it mattered. The woman nodded. I listened. He smiled. Sometimes that's the hardest part. Coda sat once more in the doorway, not blocking it, just facing inward, watching them. Lena waved. He lifted his paw slightly. Not a trick, not a command, just a movement. They stepped into the hallway, and this time, nothing followed them out. No rustle, no whisper, no warning, only quiet, the kind that comes after something heavy has finally been said. As they walked down the stairs, Ramirez spoke softly. Not every rescue looks like one. Coda's ears twitched. Sometimes, Ramirez said, it looks like a dog sitting in front of a door. Coda glanced up at him, and then forward again. Ready, but not tense, because the truth was out now. And once the truth is spoken, it doesn't need to hide anymore. It just needs space to heal. The ambulance doors closed with a soft metallic thud. Not loud, not urgent, just final. Lena sat inside with a blanket around her shoulders, her legs tucked close to her chest. Her mother sat beside her, one arm wrapped around her back, the other resting on the edge of the stretcher where her husband lay. Machines hummed quietly. A monitor blinked with steady green light. Outside, Ramirez stood with Coda near the curb. The street smelled faintly of wet asphalt and coffee from the corner shop. Morning had come in slow and gray. Okay, buddy, Ramirez said gently. That's our part. Coda watched through the small window in the back of the ambulance. His ears were forward, his tail still. Not worried, just making sure. Lena turned in her seat and saw him. Her hand lifted. A small wave. Coda shifted his weight and raised his head higher so she could see him. The ambulance rolled forward. Slowly, carefully, then disappeared into traffic. Coda stood there for a moment longer, waiting. Ramirez clipped the leash a little shorter. Come on. They walked back to the patrol car. The engine started. The radio crackled. Life kept moving. But something inside Ramirez felt quieter now. Later that afternoon, they returned to the station. Coda drank water from his bowl and lay down near Ramirez's desk. His paws were dusty, his breathing steady. Ramirez filled out paperwork. Lines of words. Times. Notes. Child safe. Adult transported. Second adult located. He paused over one line. Then wrote, Canine alert prevented delay. He looked down at Coda. You won't get a medal for that, he murmured. Coda lifted one ear. Then closed his eyes again. That night Ramirez dreamed of doors. Not locked ones. Not broken ones. Just doors that opened slowly, letting light into dark rooms. In the morning his phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. Patient stable. Discharged soon. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. 2 days later, Ramirez and Coda stood outside the hospital entrance again. The sky was brighter this time, blue and clean. Coda's leash was loose, his step light. They didn't go inside. They waited near the bench by the doors. After a while, the sliding glass opened. Lena came out first. Her backpack was slung over one shoulder. Her hair was tied back neatly. Behind her, her mother pushed a wheelchair. Her father sat in it, paler than before, but awake. Smiling, Lena saw Coda and froze. Coda! Her voice carried across the pavement. She ran toward him. Not fast, not reckless, just eager. Coda stood. Didn't pull. Didn't jump. He waited. Lena wrapped her arms around his neck, buried her face in his fur. I knew you'd be here, she said. Her father reached out, touched Coda's back gently. Good dog, he said. His voice was weak, but sincere. Ramirez stood a few steps back, watching. The mother met his eyes. Thank you, she said. Again. This time without shaking. He nodded. Glad he's okay. They stood together for a moment. The sound of cars passing, birds in the trees, a hospital cart rolling by. Can we take him home? Lena asked. Ramirez smiled faintly. He's got work to do. She pouted, then nodded. He already did it. Her father laughed softly. He did. Coda sat, tail swaying, not guarding, not searching, just present. They walked together to the curb. The family climbed into a taxi. Before the door closed, Lena leaned out. You don't have to block the door anymore, she said. Coda's ears flicked. The taxi drove away. Ramirez and Coda stayed until it turned the corner. Then they walked back toward the car. The street felt lighter. Not because something big had happened, but because something bad had ended. That evening, Ramirez took Coda to the small park behind the station. The grass was damp. The air smelled like leaves. Coda sniffed around the base of a tree, lifted his head, looked toward the road, then back to Ramirez. You did good, Ramirez said. Coda wagged his tail. Once, twice. Not excited. Content. They sat on the bench. The sun slid lower, painting the sidewalk in gold. Ramirez leaned back. You know, he said. Most people think rescue is loud. Coda turned his head. Sirens, Ramirez continued. Shouting. Rushing. Coda's ears moved at the sound of a distant horn. But sometimes, Ramirez said, it's just not leaving a door. Coda rested his chin on Ramirez's knee. The city breathed around them. No emergencies. No alarms. Just evening. When they finally left, the park gate closed behind them with a soft click. Not a lock. Just a sound. At the apartment building, the hallway lights glowed warm. Apartment 3B's door was closed. But inside there were voices now. A television playing. A pot boiling. Normal sounds. Ramirez paused. Coda did not. He walked past the door without stopping. Without sniffing. Without sitting. As if his work there was finished. Outside, the night had settled in. Streetlights flickered on. Windows glowed with dinner and conversation. Ramirez looked down at Coda. Safe at last, he said. Coda's tail swayed slowly. They walked on. Not because there was danger, but because there wasn't. And that was the point. Because safety doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly. In a warm kitchen. In a child's steady breath. In a dog who no longer needs to stand in front of a door. Spring arrived without asking permission. One morning, the trees outside the station were suddenly green, and the air smelled like wet soil and fresh leaves. Ramirez noticed it on his way in, coffee in one hand, Coda's leash in the other. You feel that? He asked. Coda lifted his nose, inhaled, then sneezed. Ramirez laughed quietly. They were assigned light patrol that day. School zones. Side streets. Nothing urgent. As they drove, Ramirez found himself thinking about apartment 3B again. Not the fear. Not the collapse. But the sound of Lena's laugh in the kitchen. The way her mother's voice had steadied. The way her father had squeezed Coda's fur like he was holding onto something solid. They passed the street that led to the building. Coda's ears flicked. Ramirez slowed. Not stopping. Just noticing. A week later, a card arrived at the station. It was handmade, crayon letters on folded paper. "Thank you, Coda. Thank you, Officer Ramirez." Inside was a drawing, a small dog in a vest, a family holding hands, and a door, wide open. Ramirez stared at it longer than he meant to. Coda sniffed the envelope, then licked the corner. "Yeah," Ramirez said softly. "That's for you." He pinned it to the corkboard above his desk. Not with the awards, not with the schedules, with the things that mattered. The days passed. Lena went back to school. Her father started taking walks in the evening, slow and careful, holding her mother's hand. The apartment windows stayed open now. Curtains moved with the breeze. One afternoon, Ramirez and Coda were called to the neighborhood for a noise complaint. Not an emergency, just music too loud. When they walked into the hallway, the smell of cooking filled the air. Something warm, something sweet. Apartment 3B's door was open. Not wide, just enough. Lena peeked out. "Coda," she whispered. Coda stopped, looked at Ramirez. Ramirez sighed. 1 minute. They stepped inside. The kitchen table was covered in plates. The father sat in a chair, looking stronger than before. The mother stood by the stove. "We're celebrating," she said. "Celebrating what?" Ramirez asked. "Tuesday," Lena said. Coda lay down near the table. Not guarding, not alert, just there. Lena sat on the floor and leaned against his side. "He's warm," she said. Ramirez watched the family move around the room. No rushing, no hiding, just living. When they left, Lena ran to the door. "You don't have to sit there anymore," she said to Coda. He wagged his tail, not because he understood the words, but because he felt the meaning. Later that night, Ramirez walked Coda through the park again. The same bench, the same trees, different air. Coda sniffed the grass, then stopped, stared at a group of kids playing near the swings. Lena was among them. She saw him, waved. He lifted his head, didn't move, just watched. Ramirez felt something settle inside him. New beginnings didn't look like fireworks. They looked like homework on a table, like a door left unlocked, like a dog lying down instead of standing guard. At the station, Ramirez overheard another officer talking about Coda. "Good instincts on that one." Ramirez didn't correct him. He didn't say it wasn't instinct alone. It was listening. It was waiting. It was not walking away when it would have been easier to. Coda slept more those days. Deep sleep, paws twitching, dreams of something. Not doors, not hallways, probably grass, probably running. One afternoon, Ramirez took him to a training yard, ran him through commands: sit, stay, heel. Coda did them all, then lay down and rolled onto his back. Belly up. Ramirez shook his head. "Off duty," he said. He scratched behind Coda's ears. "You don't always have to be ready." Coda sighed. A long content sound. They drove past the building again. This time the door was open. Laughter spilled out. Music played low. Coda glanced, then looked forward. No tension. No pull. Ramirez smiled. "That's what it looks like," he said, "when something ends right." The sun went down slowly. Windows glowed. Streetlights came on. And the city kept moving. But in one small apartment, and one quiet hallway, fear had been replaced by routine. And routine, by peace. Because new beginnings don't announce themselves. They slip in quietly. Through open doors. Through steady breaths. Through a dog who no longer needs to block the way. They begin when guarding turns into resting. The early morning air was cool and pale. Mist hovered above the sidewalk as Ramirez walked Coda through the neighborhood, the city still half asleep. Trash trucks groaned in the distance. A bakery door opened down the street, sending out the smell of warm bread. Coda walked at Ramirez's side. Loose leash. Relaxed tail. No urgency. No mission. Just movement. They passed rows of windows glowing softly with morning light. Somewhere inside a radio played. Somewhere else a kettle whistled. Life waking up. Ramirez slowed near the corner park. The same one with the bench. The same one where Coda had once rested his chin on his knee. They sat again. Birds hopped along the fence. A jogger passed, nodding politely. Coda watched the world without scanning it, without measuring it, without bracing for it. Ramirez rested his elbows on his knees. You know, he said quietly, people talk about instinct like it's a trick. Coda's ears twitched at the sound of a distant bus. They think it's sudden, dramatic. Coda sniffed the breeze. But yours, Ramirez said, yours is different. The dog turned his head slightly. Ramirez smiled. It waits. He remembered the hallway, the dust in the light, the door that would not open. He remembered how Coda had not barked, not rushed, not panicked. He had simply stayed. Most of the time, Ramirez continued, we rush past the quiet signs. Coda lowered his head to the ground, sniffed, then lifted it again. Someone crying too softly. Coda's tail moved once. A room that smells wrong. Coda blinked. A door that shouldn't stay closed. Coda shifted closer to Ramirez's leg and leaned his shoulder there. Not heavy, just touching. Instinct, Ramirez said, isn't about knowing everything. The park was filling now. A woman pushing a stroller. A man with a paper cup of coffee. A child dragging a stick behind him. It's about not leaving, Ramirez said. When something asks you to stay. Coda rested his chin on Ramirez's knee. Ramirez looked down at him. You didn't understand the words, he said softly. But you understood the moment. The sun rose higher. Light spilled across the grass. Somewhere nearby a dog barked. Coda did not respond. He stayed still. Ramirez's phone buzzed. A message from the station. Routine assignment. Normal work. He stood and clipped the leash. As they walked, they passed apartment 3BS building. Not slowly. Not deliberately. Just passing. The door was open again. Music floated into the hallway. A voice called out, Lena, breakfast. Laughter followed. Coda glanced once. Then looked ahead. No pull. No pause. The door did not need him anymore. And that was how Ramirez knew the story had reached its ending. Not with a siren. Not with applause. But with absence. The absence of fear. The absence of waiting. The absence of a dog standing guard. They crossed the street together. Cars moved around them. The city made space. Ramirez felt something settle in his chest. Quiet certainty. You didn't save them, he murmured. Coda looked up. You just didn't walk away. They reached the next block. Another building. Another door. Another day. Instinct wasn't magic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a miracle. It was listening to a small sound and believing it mattered. It was feeling tension in a room and choosing not to ignore it. It was staying when everything else said go. Ramirez stopped at the corner and waited for the light. Coda sat, side by side, not guarding, not watching, just ready. The light changed. They crossed. And somewhere behind them, in a warm kitchen with open curtains, a family was eating breakfast. A child was laughing. A man was sipping coffee slowly. A woman was humming. No one thought about the door anymore. And that was the gift. Because the meaning of instinct was never about danger. It was about connection. About noticing another heartbeat when it faltered. About standing between fear and silence. And saying without words, not yet. Not alone. Not today. Ramirez and Coda walked on. Through sunlight. Through noise. Through ordinary streets. And the world did not change. But one small corner of it had learned how to breathe again. And somewhere, in the quiet place where training meets compassion, a dog's instinct had become a family's beginning. Because sometimes the bravest thing a heart can do is recognize when another one needs help and stay.